Oh, there we go. Welcome, Simon. Okay, so we'll kick off here today. It's 10 o'clock exactly. And we'll begin our meeting with a recognition of the territories of the Hupatchisitt and Tashot First Nations, and to honor and recognize that we are doing our business principally, in their territories. With that in mind, though, we are in a hybrid format meeting, which means that we have the ability to have the meeting attendees be not only in the boardroom, but also online. And I would note that quite a few of us are, so they may be coming to you from different territories. With that, the next step is to state that because it is a hybrid meeting and because we are broadcasting this meeting, it is being videoed and being recorded, that you can watch this video on YouTube or embedded on our website at acrd.bc.ca. But the way to interact with the board and the committee of the whole, and in this case, is through an email address, which is responses@acrd.bc.ca. And that will be the principal place where we monitor the conversation, though we do have staff who can check the Zoom chat if anybody is an attendee there. So we'll start off with introductions around the table and here in this room, and then I'll call out some first names for folks to introduce themselves online. So with that, we'll start with Cynthia. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Cynthia Dick, General Manager of Administrative Services.
Good morning, Todd Patola, a alternate for Shari Minions from the city.
Good morning, Akama Penny Cote, I'm the Sprout Lake Electoral Area Director on the Regional District Board.
Good morning, I'm Mike Sprout and I represent Cherry Creek area.
Good morning, I'm Mariah Coos from the Hutchupcus Tribe Government. Thank you.
Veda Sega, Area Director for Area C, Long Beach. I'm Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer.
Mike Kirk, General Manager of Planning and Development at the Regional District.
Great. And Susan, go ahead.
Good morning, Susan Roth, and I represent the best interests of the people of Beaver Creek electoral area.
And Fred. Fred, go ahead.
Thank you. Couldn't hear you there. Fred Boykill, Regional Director for Beaufort.
Thank you. And Bob.
Good morning, everybody. Bob Beckett, Area A, Bamfield representative.
And Tom.
Yes, good morning. Tom Steer, Appointed Director from the District of Tofino.
And Kirsten.
Morning, Kirsten Johnson, Director for the Toquat Nation.
And Dr. Minions.
Shari Minions, Mayor for the City of Port Alberni.
And Levana.
Good morning, Director Levana Mastrangelo from Ucluelet First Nation and coming in from Campbell River, traditional territories of Homolko and Wewekai and Weewakam.
Great, thank you. And I suppose I'll note Director Patola is now the alternate director for Deb Haggard. He has moved seats. And my name is Oklama Sayachat, My name is John Jack. I'm the chief counselor for Wyatt, but I'm also the director and the chair for the ACRD. And so thank you, everybody. I'm not certain if there's anybody else. Oh, Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly will. Thank you. Daniel Sayan. I'm the CAO for the ACRD, and I'm coming to you from the Tla'amin territories, and glad to be here today.
Great. Okay, so with that in mind, the next step is the approval of the agenda. And so the agenda is fairly light. We have a set of minutes as well as a presentation from Mr. Thompson and Rasmussen from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Could we have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Director Coots, seconded by Director Cote. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, that brings us into declarations, and we're not making any decisions, so I think we're okay. Next up is the meeting minutes for the committee of the whole meeting dated August 28th, 2024. Anyone like to move the minutes? Thank you, Director Sparrow, seconded by Director Cote. Does anybody have any comments? Yep, seeing none. All those in favor? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. All right, that brings us into presentations. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Patrick Thompson and Mr. Simon Rasmussen from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. They have a presentation for us. So you should be able to share your screen, whomever that might be. And thank you and welcome. And please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Just bear with me for 1 second. I'm Patrick Thompson, the Director of Governance Services here with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. I'm also here with Simon Rasmussen, who is Senior Planning Analyst with the Ministry. I'm just back from holidays literally this morning. I've been on vacation for the past week, so I am just sort of opening the presentation, and we'll get started in 1 second. Thanks. Simon, if you're able to open it and share it, that might be ideal.
Sure. Just 1 second here. Hopefully, this will show up as what you're supposed to be seeing here.
Perfect.
There we go. All right. Yeah. So just let me know when you're ready to, or I can just advance. Yeah. You go ahead and do your thing.
Okay. Sorry for the false start here, everyone. But as I noted, I'm Patrick Thompson, and here with Simon. We are pleased to be joining you here today from the traditional territories of the Algonquin peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We're both part of the ministry's governance and structure branch. I've been here for about maybe 4.5 years, but I've only been here about 2 months in the current role with the ministry. So our branch, among other things, are responsible for managing the local government restructure program. We work with communities to help align their governance and services with the appropriate local government structures. Simon, if you could switch screens and maybe go to presentation mode.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I was in presentation, but we seem to have just lost that. Just bear with me. 1 second. All right. There we go.
Perfect.
That worked better. All right.
Okay. So we've been asked to speak with you today about provincial requirements for municipal incorporation of regional district electoral areas and the steps we take when considering requests to change structure of local governments. We plan to cover the following topics, starting with the guiding principles, and then sharing an overview of the core types of studies that we support. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. Next slide.
Just to confirm, are we still in presentation mode or has that disappeared
are.
all of a sudden?
We
Oh, good.
are.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay.
Thanks, Simon.
Sorry, the joys of multitasking with multiple screens here.
This is very real. This is a very real presentation.
That's right. It's extremely live.
Oh, we're back off presentation mode,
Oh,
Simon.
really? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Perhaps you could just bear with me for just 30 seconds here, and I'll see if I can get this sorted out. I apologize. I'm just gonna stop sharing for 1 second. I had this all sorted out earlier, and now it seems to be not cooperating very well.
No worries, Simon. If you have 2 screens, I would start the presentation on your main screen, like start it, and then share your second screen if that's how you're doing it.
Yeah, that's what I was doing, but it's just not being very cooperative. I have recently discovered that as a Gen Xer, I am not particularly as tech savvy as I thought that I was, but we are working on that. Let's see if let's just give it one more try here.
Fair enough. We're okay.
Get it sorted out. Okay, thank you for your patience. Just a second.
Simon, one option, we could just open the PDF copy. You have it there, and then just kind of run and share that screen.
Oh, that's a much simpler idea. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
that way
let's do that. Okay. Yeah, otherwise it's going to take a while. So, okay, let me just share that screen with you. And let me. Sorry, apologies for this. Just okay. How's that? It's not quite as pretty as the other version, but at least we can actually read off and see it. You'll just have to bear with the.
We'll work with it for sure.
Stuff around the edge. All right. Yes. Is that better?
Yay!
I don't think that made any difference. All right. Sorry. I'll let you.
Yeah, that was good. That was fine, actually, Simon. Good.
All right. So I'm going to go to. I believe this is where we were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. I'll let you carry. I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Sorry, everyone. But thanks for your patience. So, I guess the first thing we wanted to mention was what we call the principles of local government restructure. So one of the key activities our branch handles is assisting unincorporated communities that wish to consider a change in their form of local governance. These requests can be driven by a number of factors, as you can all appreciate. These can include strong community identity, concerns over nearby development pressures, service delivery challenges, or a sense that the community is not being ideally served by the regional district model. In all cases, the ministry's response to requests for structural change is focused on what we call the following, principles. First of all, is to identify the problem that the community is trying to solve. Secondly, clarify if the problem can be addressed within the existing local government structure. Thirdly, ensure that the community, elected officials, and local government staff have a common understanding of this problem and how to move forward. So those are kind of the guiding principle. One thing we kind of like to highlight is that we don't undertake this work in a top-down fashion. Our goal is to create processes for community-supported outcomes. One of the ways we support communities in leading the problem assessment is by providing local governments with grants to study the issues. That way, change comes from the local level rather than top-down. So Simon, next page. So in terms of types of studies, we'd like to give you the overview of the 3 types of studies supported by our grants. These are community issues assessment, governance and services studies, and thirdly, incorporation studies. Generally, these studies build on each other. For example, it would be rare to start a municipal corporation study without first working through the earlier stages of analysis. Doing so, recognizing that local government structural changes are not to be taken lightly, and that a well-informed community is in the best place to make decisions about its future. Any study requires a board resolution and regional district resources, including staff time and potentially funding. The board also decides who the consultant is and the timing of the project. So I think we're going to first jump over to Simon to talk about the community issues assessment. If that's okay.
Yes. So the first type of study is, as Patrick said, a community issues assessment, and the goals of a community issues assessment are to better understand how decisions are made in the relationship between service providers. This kind of study provides residents with information on their current system of governance and aims to improve awareness about who provides services in the community. Community issues assessment also identifies current and emerging issues and pressures that might be related to services as seen by residents, and provides opportunities for residents, property owners, private water utilities, improvement districts, First Nations to articulate the issues they see in the community. This can be done through open houses, public forums, and online surveys, and government-to-government engagement with First Nations. A community issues assessment can help support the current governance structure by highlighting areas where improvement might be needed. Can also lay the groundwork for a future study that concentrates on the issues raised and then takes a targeted approach to addressing them. For example, by conducting an inventory of services and concerns of residents, it could establish the basic considerations for potential municipal incorporation. Ministry grants are used to retain the services of a local government consultant who will conduct the work of the assessment in a neutral and transparent manner and submit a final report to the Regional District Board upon its conclusion. The Regional District Board can then decide what steps need to be taken in response to the identified issues. Community issues assessments are intended to be high level. They don't include recommendations for governance changes or any examination of municipal incorporation. They don't provide detailed technical or financial information on the current situation or on the impacts of changes to current governance. They also don't present options or make recommendations on changes to the existing governance model, services, or boundaries. Now, despite all of these qualifiers, they are an important step in identifying the roots of a community's issues before examining any structural change. I'll turn it back over to Patrick to talk about governance and services studies.
So thanks, Simon. Once the issues facing community have been identified, a regional district may wish to undertake a governance and services study. While the basics are similar to the community issues assessment that Simon just described, a governance study takes a much deeper dive into the technical and financial details of the current system. It also provides recommendations for a targeted examination of a specific type of structural change, which could include changing electoral area boundaries, amalgamation with a neighboring municipality, or incorporation as a standalone municipality. The recommendations of a governance study must ultimately be supported by the Regional District Board. The work of a governance study is led by one or more consultants funded through the ministry grant. However, their work is supervised by a volunteer committee of residents that live in the study subject area. The purpose of the committee is to provide advice on community engagement and assess the findings of the report. For example, recommendations for next steps, if applicable. The committee serves as an objective, fact-finding, and oversight body established to ensure that all stages of the governance study, including the approval and execution of a community engagement strategy by independent qualified engagement consultants, are conducted in a neutral and balanced fashion. Committee members should view themselves as process managers, not decision makers, and therefore favor consensus rather than votes as the method of working and moving the process forward. Individual members of the committee are expected to remain impartial and must ensure that any expression of personal opinions does not undermine the committee's neutrality or credibility as an oversight body or as a conduit for providing information to the public. Most importantly, the committee is also responsible to listen and reflect on the consultant's input and community responses and opinions, and decide on the community's interest in incorporation through a final recommendation on any proposed structural changes or further study. Committee members can expect to serve a time commitment between 1 and 2 years until conclusion of the study.
So I think there we go. That's better. Went one too many screens. If a governance study recommends that municipal incorporation be explored for a community, then we come to the third type of study supported by our ministry, which is an incorporation study. This study mirrors the structure of a governance study in that it's led by a study committee and usually retains 1 or more consultants to support its work. It also follows similar timelines. It can take 1.5 to 2 years to complete. Now, unlike a governance study, however, an incorporation study is focused on a single purpose, which is to provide the electors within the study area with the information and understanding required to make an informed decision on municipal incorporation. To fulfill this purpose, it undertakes a thorough, objective, and technical examination of the incorporation option and its implications for governance and service delivery in the area. And under the direction of the Incorporation Study Committee, the study includes a comparative analysis of the services, governance, financial, property tax, and other implications associated with the incorporation of the boundary. It examines not only the local services provided by the regional district, but also those provided by the provincial government that would become the responsibility of a new municipal council as a result of incorporation. These would include all roads within the boundary that are not provincial highways, and for communities over 5,000 people, 70% of the cost of policing, and this jumps up to 100% for communities over 15,000 people. Central component of an incorporation study is First Nations consultation. As the Crown, it's the province's duty rather than the Incorporation Study Committee or the consultants to consult with First Nations on the implications of municipal incorporation. First Nations whose traditional territory overlaps with the study area are notified by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs when the committee is first formed, and this allows First Nations to follow the committee's progress and participate as they so desire. First Nations also receive technical briefings about how the municipality would operate and what implications might exist for lands and resources within their traditional territory. Consultation also serves to build relationships between First Nations, regional district, and, if incorporated, the new municipality. Meaningful consultation can take time and may extend the study process if significant concerns require provincial accommodation. As part of an incorporation study, the province also prepares what we call a restructure assistance offer to mitigate part of certain initial municipal costs over the first 5 years. This offer typically includes the initial startup costs of a new municipality. The Ministry of Finance usually contributes rural tax rebates, and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure will often contribute towards road maintenance costs for a period of time after incorporation. All this is intended to ensure that the new municipality is on sound financial footing when it comes into being. If an incorporation study committee recommends that the question be put to a vote, and it's endorsed by the regional district, and then the Minister of Municipal Affairs can order that a referendum be held within the study area on whether or not to incorporate. And all eligible residents and non-resident property owners would be entitled to vote. And the threshold to pass is 50% plus 1. If the vote is in favor, the final decision on whether to incorporate is then sent to the provincial cabinet for consideration. If successful, the process then begins to establish the new municipality, such as hiring an interim corporate officer to set up the municipal administration framework, initial bylaws, and preparing to hold first local election for a municipal council.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I think it's important to reiterate that an incorporation study is the final step, not the first step, in examining potential structural change. It's also worth noting that municipal incorporation may not be the right fit for every community. For example, municipalities have more mandatory services they must provide, such as maintenance of all roads that are not considered provincial highways, as well as policing for communities over 5,000 people. As with the regional district board, municipal councils also operate under the principle of collective decision-making, which means that the mayor and councillors must still come to agreement on decisions rather than acting independently. Time and experience have shown that incorporation does not necessarily resolve local issues. It simply changes who decides. Ultimately, it is the voters of a community that will decide if incorporation is right for them. Sometimes, despite exploring the issue for many years, a community may still choose to remain unincorporated. For example, some of you may be aware of Salt Spring Island, who went through a range of studies, and then when it came time to a vote, incorporation was defeated by nearly 2-to-1 margin. The same situation have happened with Sorrento Blind Bay, where the margin was even higher. In both cases, however, the communities benefited from going through the process. On Salt Spring, for example, what's called a local community commission was created to delegate certain decisions from the regional district board. Meanwhile, in Sorrento Blind Bay, the electoral area was split and important relationships were established with area First Nations. In your area, I understand that historically Sprout Lake had an incorporation study done. I think it was in 2007. I also understand that it culminated in the study committee not recommending that decision to go to incorporation. This was sort of based on feedback from local engagement and the results of a technical summary. I guess this is sort of a good example of a committee heeding what they learned and heard through the study process. Currently, in 1989, the community of Okanagan Falls, just south of Penticton, held a referendum on incorporation, which was defeated. Currently, myself and Simon, 35 years later, they're once again, we're working with Okanagan Falls, who are again considering the question, having reached the final stage of an incorporation study, may hold a vote early next year in 2025. But regardless of the outcome, the process has been beneficial for the community in evaluating its services, governance, and relationships with its neighbors, but only because they took the time to explore the issue in stages rather than starting with the assumption that incorporation was the answer. Just for your information, we're going to just run through the typical process. Maybe it might answer some of the questions that you might have. So when studying local government structuring, the regional district and the province each have a role to play. The study ultimately belongs to the regional district and the community it represents, and it is the regional district board that will consider the findings and, as applicable, act on any recommendations to determine what happens next. The electoral area director provides an important link between the community and the board, ensuring the study process is carried out in an inclusive, open, and transparent manner. As we've sort of discussed before, the board hires one or more consultants, depending on the type of study, following their internal procurement processes, of course. The consultants report directly to the regional district staff, who administer the contract and ensure that expected outputs meet the requirements outlined in the applicable terms of reference. So the regional district provides the ministry with progress reports at various stages of the project and submits draft and final reports for comments. Regional district staff are also responsible for ensuring the information collected by the consultant is appropriately shared with the public, the regional district board, the community, and Ministry of Municipal Affairs. The ministry provides the grant funding for the study. Ministry staff remain available as a resource to regional district staff, consultants, and the committee, and in committee meetings as a provincial representative and observer. They are also be available to take questions and report back and act as a neutral observer during the study process. They will also provide additional input, including review of the draft materials and provision of comments prior to the completion of the final report. Finally, the ministry is responsible to discharge the constitutional duty to consult with potentially affected First Nations and Indigenous groups. Final slide here. Sort of the nuts and bolts, how to initiate a study. If a regional district decides the time is right to explore the issues and concerns facing an unincorporated community and its residents, the first step is to contact us, the Governance and Structure Branch at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. So you can see our email address there and our phone number. Our team will work with regional district staff to identify the appropriate study format. Once the regional district board signs off and have officially requested the study from the ministry staff will present the grant proposal to the Minister of Municipal Affairs for study approval. If the grant is approved, ministry and regional district staff will jointly develop terms of reference so that residents, the regional district, and elected officials have a common understanding of its scope. From there, depending on the study format, the regional district call for one or more consultants using their internal procurement process. And then once the consultant has been retained, the work on the study can begin. For a community issues assessment, the process typically takes a year. Meanwhile, for the governance and incorporation studies, typically up to 2 years. So regardless of the outcome of any study, problem identification, process, and public engagement are important drivers of change in unincorporated communities. Understanding the views of residents, property owners, and First Nations helps shape options for communities and transition. And studying the technical and financial impacts of change help make for a well-informed electorate that can decide on their future. So this is our last slide. Thank you for your patience as we got started today. If there's time, we're happy to take any questions from the board.
And we recognize that that was a lot to digest in a short space of time. So we're more than happy to answer questions if time permits.
And we can also take away questions too today. We may not be able to sort of address them all. Happy to do that.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a speakers list already. Thank you. I have Directors Roth, and then Director Boyko. Please go ahead.
Perfect.
Thank you. I jotted down some information as we were going here. In the ACRD, I believe we have 14 areas in total. 8 are incorporated, and that includes 4 Treaty First Nations and 4 municipalities or the likes. And 6 are unincorporated, 6 electoral areas, and my area being one of them. It feels like we're losing local autonomy, so I'm very interested in this because we want to keep decision-making closer to the people. But this is something else that I noticed, the types of voting that we have. We have unweighted votes, which one vote for each director, and weighted votes, depending on the size of the area's population. Now, according to the BC government website, the weighted votes are only used to determine voting strength and director representation on the board. The people of Tishat and Hupachesith are included in the weighted vote, yet these 2 nations do not hold a position at the boardroom table, nor are they consulted when a weighted vote is held. So something seems wrong here. It doesn't work. I'm kind of looking at like, we need to change. We need to make some changes with the whole regional district system. Thank you.
Okay. I think that sounds like more of a comment, so probably not a question, but it's actually really interesting context. The topic of weighted votes, as you probably all know, is somewhat complex. So we probably won't sort of dive into that today. But I feel like that is, for example, the type of perhaps community issues that can be identified during a community issues assessment. Or if you have specific questions, our team at the same, Simon, you're still sharing your screen there.
Oh, no, he's not.
Oh, no.
I don't think so. No.
Sorry, maybe it's my screen. It's just jumping up. Sorry, everyone. I'm working with one screen today too, which adds challenge when you get used to having 3 screens. So if that's okay, Director Roth, I've noted the comment, and it's something that we have kind of come across before. And if you'd like to sort of have a more in-depth conversation about that, about the weighted votes, we're happy to kind of have that, at a staff level. But as I said, it probably, and Simon, maybe you can sort of address this as well, if there's something that you've come across in your work through the community issues assessment.
Can I make one more comment about it?
Sure, of course.
Go ahead.
It's really noticeable in our Sprout Lake electoral area because they actually get an additional vote just because of Tishat First Nations. Yet we don't consult with Tishat. So yeah, I think it's kind of an important thing to address right away, actually.
Right.
Thank you.
I can't speak to a lot of the particulars of some of those kinds of structural issues, but I know that you're certainly not alone. I know that there are a couple of other regional districts that have, sometimes taken a look around their board table and said to us, well, this structure seems like it needs some adjusting, and so certainly, if the board does feel that there are issues that could be potentially addressed. There are some options to make some tweaks, and I don't know to the extent that they would be applicable in your case, but it's certainly it's something worth exploring. So I mean, if the board wants to follow up on that more, we're certainly open to having a more detailed conversation about that.
All right, thank you. Director Boyko, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question relates to this presentation. Now, we weren't provided it before this meeting, so we haven't seen it before. Can we get it emailed to us directly or put on the public website with the notes on the bottom that this staff are reading verbatim, so we don't have to try and read a transcript of this thing for future reference? Is that a possibility? Then I have a question after that.
Right. Well, look forward to sharing a copy of the presentation. I think typically we'd provide, and I think we have already provided a copy to staff. We typically wouldn't provide it with our notes, but we're happy to kind of provide any extra information or clarifications that might be helpful for you. And what was your question, Director Boyko?
My question relates to community issues assessment, identifying the root of community issues. Now, how does that actually go about? Do we just hold a public hearing and a forum, or what's the actual community engagement method that is actually being recommended here? Because we're having very wide range of community engagement in our local area. So perhaps if we have a town hall, we'll have 150, 200 people show up. But if we have a public hearing, we'll have 3 people show up. So we're having a problem with actually getting good community engagement and representing what the people actually want. So having an open forum where people can do things with or without staff doesn't really matter, but having that. So what's the recommendation that's coming from the staff thing?
Patrick, if you do you mind, if I don't mind, I might be able to speak to this a little bit. So there are a few of them that are currently going on in the province, and they one example I can give is in the Cowichan Valley Regional District, and it's following what we would consider to be a pretty traditional format. Typically, the community outreach portion involves a few different stages. So there's mail outs and the option for online surveys and things like that, which are pretty typical. But usually the consultants will also hold a series of open houses, especially if the community is fairly large geographically, to provide, well, really 2 things. One is an educational opportunity to make sure people understand how the services they're receiving are provided and who provides them, but also to collect and gather additional feedback. So in the CVRD, one of the ways that they're doing that, because the area is quite large, it covers Mill Bay, Shawnigan, and Cobble Hill. So they did open houses in each of those communities, and they're trying to spread the opportunities around for people to engage. Director Boyko, I think you are absolutely right in your basic point that it can be a challenge for for local governments to get people out. I mean, you can do everything you can, but at the end of the day, if 3 people show up, then that's kind of what you're left to deal with. But certainly the intent with the community issues assessment is to try and cover as many bases as possible, so that there are as many opportunities for the public to participate in whatever way is best suited for them.
And are you guys involved with these open houses, and how many people are actually showing up?
We typically aren't. Our ministry is not typically directly involved with them. Our role is really to support the regional district in, essentially stick handling the community issues assessment. But the bulk of the work is really done by a hired consultant who has an understanding of how these sorts of processes work, or sometimes even one or more, depending on the nature. The regional district's role is partly as more of we give them the grant to administer and distribute, and there's obviously some staff time inevitably involved with these kinds of things. But for the most part, our role is more of a process oversight and support. And can you repeat your second question again? That's or the second part of your question, brother?
I'm just wondering how many people actually show up, because sometimes in the ACRD we'll have an open house, and try to get community engagement, and we'll have, 3-4 people show up. And in the Beaufort area, we've had that, and we've had like 3 times the amount of actual staff show up.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out if you have any recommendations on how to increase public engagement, because we had to have a let it go in the background, but what else is working in other ways? Like,
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would probably defer more to the individual regional districts that have done this, because I think each of them has taken a different approach. But certainly, I could certainly provide staff, ACRD staff, with the contact at the CVRG who might be able to speak a little bit more about what's worked for them and what hasn't, if that's something that would be helpful.
That's a good idea, Simon. Which area, Director Boyko, are you representing?
Beaufort.
Beaufort?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we often try to do, is to connect local governments with each other, because it's sometimes a really difficult nut to crack, right? Trying to reach people. And I think some of the issues assessments that I've seen, they've taken a range of approaches that Simon has mentioned. Surveys sometimes work for some communities, to get that feedback. Other communities, people want to show up and be there in person, so it does sort of vary.
I agree. We had a survey on our aquatic center, and we had less than 4% of the population actually fill it out.
Right.
And we're having community town halls, and we're having hundreds of people show up,
Right.
and we only have 1,000 people in the area. So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to gauge community input and get relatively good feedback on items like this, as well as everything else. But this is something that's very relevant in today's model.
Yeah, with town halls, it's very self-selecting because people can bring their issues to those discussions, whereas when there's a set agenda to talk about a specific thing, people are usually less enthused because they're not able to get on the soapbox. That being said, though, these kind of methods can be incorporated because of the way that this is structured. Municipal Affairs issues the grant, which means that we would hire a consultant who would undertake the work. And part of that would be creating the terms of reference for what the work actually looks like. So we could, in this process, and I think at the very early stage process as well, identify the types of engagement we would like these people to undertake. As long as it's well resourced, then we could do things in a certain way. We could have questionnaires, but we could also have town halls, and we could also have public hearings or other types of things. That being said, I do have one more comment and a question, and they're kind of related. So one thing that we've identified at the regional district level is that Hupetchisut, Sechelt, and other nations within the boundaries of the regional district are not necessarily as adequately represented as treaty nations are. So we've undertaken work with Municipal Affairs and other regional districts in trying to figure out a way for inclusive governance to be put forward. And it is an action plan in the DRIPA action plan itself, which means that we would be addressing some of the concerns that Dr. Roth has brought up by directly having at Sechelt and Hupetchisut directly involved in the board as a matter of course. Now, how long it would take us to get to that point is part of it as well. I guess my other question is, Municipal Affairs and maybe other ministries would be responsible for consultation with Indigenous communities within the regional district or within the topic. And I'm wondering, what is the interface between what the ministry hears on behalf of the Crown and how that gets translated to the committee or the consultants, or both?
Right, that's a really good question, and thank you for bringing up the inclusive regional governance piece, because that's an important topic. Simon, you probably have more experience than I can say in terms of the current work that I've been doing with the incorporation study in Okanagan Falls. There's sort of definitely a lot of engagement between ourselves and the nations that are affected and the regional district. So we use this opportunity to sort of forge, better communications and better dialogue where that's, where that may be missing. I'm not sure if that kind of addresses the intersectionality that you're kind of getting at, but we definitely sort of put that at the forefront of this work to try and address some of those interests as well. Simon, feel free to add anything that you have to that comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a lot on the dynamics of the area that you're talking about. I mean, in the case of Okanagan Falls, up until today, the province's relationship with local First Nations and the Incorporation Study Committee's relationship have not really crossed paths much, but that will probably be changing fairly soon. We've been working on sort of separate processes, and the Incorporation Study Committee, I think, has been a little more deferential to us and saying, you let us know when you hear, because their terms of reference and their mandate are fairly limited. But part of the broader goal of any sort of study, even if it's not explicit in the terms of reference, is to try and improve some of those relationships as a part of the study process. And so, even if there's not a formal process for necessarily saying, okay, Incorporation Study or Governance Study Committee, this is what local First Nations are saying about these particular issues that you're looking at. The ultimate goal is to make sure that there's better dialogue between the regional district and First Nations, or if incorporation takes place, the new municipality and First Nations as well. So it's a little bit more of an undefined organic process, but I think hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of at least some of the broader principles that we're trying to go for, even if we don't have a really detailed roadmap on how that should be handled in each jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you for that. Director Roth, go ahead.
Thank you. It's just, I'm kind of need some clarification here. A lot of this information is new to me too, but from what I understand, a treaty nation or a treaty First Nation is an incorporated nation, and a non-treaty nation is an unincorporated nation, and that's the difference. But a non-treaty nation may not wish to incorporate, so it's like two different types of government. And they don't fit under, they would not fit under a regional district structure. So how can we make it work for everyone? Like maybe it's us that has to change, not non-treaty First Nations. I can't quite, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that's really part of the goal of the whole inclusive regional governance initiative, is to try and figure out what that structure can look like anywhere in the province. The legislation as it is in the Local Government Act right now doesn't really consider the existence of non-treaty First Nations in its structure, and that's obviously been it's not a new problem, but it certainly has become a more pressing issue as more treaty First Nations in recent decades have become participating members of regional district boards, and so I'm not personally directly involved in that project, but I know that that what you're describing, Director Roth, is really exactly what that whole initiative is aiming to try and resolve, and it is definitely a work in progress. But I like to think that it's a good one, and hopefully it will bear some fruit in the short period of time.
Thank you. Director Roth brings up a couple of questions that are fairly poignant, and I think they may be more relevant for the conversations around inclusive governance. But I will say a couple of things that I know. I know that in the treaty, whether or not Indigenous communities are treated as members of the board, but it stays somewhat mum on whether or not they are incorporated or not. They're treated like municipalities because every nation, regardless of their size, has a council of at least 3. And so with that, it was thought by the provincial government at the time that if they wanted to participate at a board level, that they would be treated like a municipality for the purposes of being appointing one of their number to sit at the table, but that they would continue to have their own election cycles, and they don't necessarily have the same responsibilities as municipalities do in regards to their jurisdictions. That is something that the nations decide on their own. I think from our perspective, I do believe, and maybe Bob can confirm this, is that when Hawaiian joined the ACRD, their population actually went down because we had our territory and our population carved out. So that, I think that was done automatically, just as a process of the treaty making. So those decisions would have to be made by Indigenous communities who do not have treaties to decide, do you want your populations, like where are your population centers? How is that all calculated? All these things would be dealt with at a provincial level, I think. How they choose their director, I think would be up to the nations, or it would be default to a member of the council, which is what they did with treaty, but other things have happened in the past as well. So I think that's something that we would need to have a conversation around. I think it is an argument for Indigenous communities to join the regional district for governance to be more proper. I think pointing out that, say, Sprout Lake or other communities get a bump in their population is just kind of an artifact of how things were before. And I think they should be changing in the future. How quickly that changes is a completely different thing. But for instance, if Beaver Creek were to decide to go through this process, it would be a conversation mostly for Beaver Creek, and I assume potentially Seashot and Hupatchisitt. What interests me is whether or not they have input that might affect the process by which you go through, because there's a process of studies that you would do, but there may be some, and this is what I'm mostly concerned about, concerns or points that either the First Nations would make that would have an impact on how the further process studies would go. And I don't think there's an answer to that. I think that's actually new ground. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, I think that's as Simon sort of alluded to earlier, it's sort of an evolution, right? And I think we're trying to evolve the system, and that includes kind of the restructure work that we're taking on. I think the work that was done with Sorrento Blind Bay, sort of ahead of ourselves with what we're doing right now with the Okanagan Falls Incorporation study, informed us, how we might be able to kind of approach things differently. So I think each study is sort of, I've noted, and again, I have only been here in this particular job for 2 months, but I have worked with as a director in the same branch for 4 years, and I've sort of seen these sort of evolutions take place. So I think that fact that we're talking about inclusive regional governance as part of this conversation is great, because I think within our branch, we're always trying to connect those emerging dots, if I can frame it like that. And I think that's exactly what kind of this represents. In terms of, what may be the impacts of those nations, I think we'd have to sort of wait and see and sort of have dialogue and have those conversations, just like we are right now with Okanagan Falls and those nations. And hopefully some of the interests and issues kind of come forward, because that allows us to kind of at least put them on the table and figure out how best to address those issues.
Okay.
As a slight aside, one of the things that we have in terms of reference, even as on initial studies like community issues assessment, is to make it clear that when it comes to engaging with First Nations about the questions that the study is exploring, it's not actually the consultant. That's the one area where the consultant actually does step aside. That the intention is to have more of a government-to-government relationship and engagement here. So the expectation is that it's the regional district that is, with the support of the consultant as needed, to do that kind of engagement and work rather than being handled through an intermediary. And so, part of the idea of that is not just in terms of relationship building, but also so that there's more of a direct line between the First Nation and the regional district staff and board, so that they can, if things do come up, that if a First Nation does have concerns about the process or about the implications of what change could come out of the study, if any, that there's a little bit less filtering that's going on, and the board can be better able to to make a decision or talk to us about how best to approach any next steps that come up.
Great, thank you. I have Directors Cote and then Boyko.
Thank you. Through the chair to the people here helping us. I was part of the Sprout Lake incorporation study back in 2006. And I remember a few things coming out of that. So I have a few questions for that, if I might. I'd like to know how much the grant is that is provided by the province to do the incorporation study these days. Remembering that when we looked at Sprout Lake, it wasn't the whole area of Sprout Lake that we were looking at incorporating.
Right.
It was just the immediate area where residences were. So what happens to the rest of your area? And help. So you mentioned that over 5 years, there would be some provincial assistance in with finances for creating your incorporation. One of the questions that came from my community was about roads, and they are expecting roads to be fixed, which I don't believe that anything really changes with the plan, the road reconstruction plan. I think that they just assist, but still the community still has to start paying for that. There's just some assistance. So I'd like some clarity on that. If Sprout Lake looked at an incorporation study, would we be revisiting the old one? Part of the reason why we dropped it was because we didn't have the commercial aspect that would help out with taxation. It would be relied mostly on residential, which was too much of a burden at that time. Thank you.
I can very briefly speak to the question about, and I might let Patrick defer to you if that's right, Patrick.
Sure.
More to talk about the upper limits of the grants and how all that works. But in terms of a boundary, there's actually a really good example of how that process works about to start in your neighboring regional district of Nanaimo. They had done a governance and services study in electoral area F that concluded last year. And one of the recommendations that came out of it was that the next step be an incorporation study, which the regional district board did endorse and requested to the province. For a variety of reasons, not least of which was because the electoral area F there is quite large and includes a number of communities, Coombs, Hilliers, whatnot, that are not necessarily, just sort of running right into each other. We ultimately encouraged the board, and this is what they decided to do a more targeted study just to determine what a boundary would be if incorporation happened. Our presentation covers sort of the general processes, but that tend to unfold. But there is an option of doing that kind of a study, and so we provided them with some funding, and they're just about to get started on doing a. It's a little bit more of a desktop exercise than it is. There's some community engagement, but it's more based on things like taxation, road networks, property. Tax classification, to try and figure out what would be a natural logical boundary if an incorporated community were to exist, and preferably if there's more than one possibility to identify that as well. And so the intent of that study is that the board will be, when this project is complete, will be presented with whatever options the consultant determines are the most viable candidates, if any, for municipal incorporation. And then it would be up to the board at that point to decide whether they wanted to move forward with that suggested boundary as a possible incorporation study.
Before we go to Director Boyko, I would suggest, but on this, I would suggest that on our behalf, I could reach out to the chair, Vanessa, as well as Doug. And I actually know Leanne Salter, so she's involved in that whole study. She's the representative for area up there. So we could have a offline conversation or have another committee of the whole, depending on how that goes, because there are real considerations around the Hilliers area and Whiskey Creek area not being involved in any of that. But that's interesting, but not in this area. Please go ahead, Director Cote.
Thank you. So, you didn't quite answer the questions, all of it yet. So what happens with the rest of the area? Does it remain with the regional district? Or it doesn't really explain how that works. There would have to be a representative then still. It would just be population would be very low. So I would say I don't think that we included Great Central Lake population when we looked at the incorporation. So and also parts of the residents on Sprout Lake that are past Lakeshore cutoff. Also, what would the grant be, or how is that calculated as to what the grant would be for each stage? And what is the assessments or the help that is being provided financially for those things that you mentioned, like roads and finance and the incorporation of the community?
I mean, in terms of the, sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
I could probably just talk to the grant if I know that's one of the questions that you'd asked,
Yeah.
Director Cote, and I can, we have, what's called sort of a restructure grant budget, which in each and every case, it's sort of up to the minister to sort of approve the funding. And we have sort of a regulation that provides sort of parameters around. And I guess as a rule of thumb, depending on how many competing, there's no guarantee, right? There's a request that's made and there's an assessment that's made on our part and a recommendation to the minister, and the minister makes a decision. Typically a community issues assessment would be between 20 and 40,000, I think, Simon. That's probably, hopefully that's accurate, and maybe a little larger for, I think that the maximum under the regulation. There's some sort of rules around what we can provide to specific local governments per year per types of study. So there's some sort of specifics there. I think the cap there is 60,000 total. But I think typically it's sort of between 20 and 40 is sort of what each stage looks like. Simon, anything else?
Yeah, it would depend mostly on the population. So, for example, the one happening in the Cowichan Valley Regional District it's one of the largest unincorporated areas in the province. It covers 3 electoral areas, and so in that case, it was appropriate. We felt to issue the full 60,000 in order to study that, but that's not typical. And then in terms of your just very briefly, Director Cote, your question about what happens to the rest of the electoral area if a smaller municipality incorporates, it would typically just remain as its own. Those communities would just still remain, with the regional district as its general local government. Depending on the population, there may be an opportunity to rebalance the boundaries of the existing or remaining electoral areas to make sure that the population balance is a little bit more equitable, but it would depend on the specific circumstances of each community.
One follow-up? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So would there be consideration then of that area being absorbed into another area?
Conceivably, it could be. I mean, another possibility is that, if there are communities that are on the fringes of the new municipality that didn't initially belong to it, there's also the potential for them to be included at a later date with a municipal boundary extension. So it's certainly not fixing in stone the new electoral area boundaries by any means. It's more just kind of reestablishing them within baseline population, essentially.
Just as a supplement to that, I live on that side of the island in the RDM, and I live in electoral area G, I think, and it is a patchwork of crazy. Like there are very disparate parts of that are disconnected from one another. Like it's French Creek, and then a place that's almost adjacent to Nanoose, and so those kind of territorial studies would really matter. So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you, Director Boykill, and then Director Roth.
Thank you, Chair. I got 2 questions. You mentioned that costs of policing would go up if we have over 5,000 people. I think we've talked about that. That's pretty straightforward. That's known throughout the whole BC. LGA thing. Talking about roads. Now, if they're going to be taken over by the potential incorporated area, are they all brought up to BC Highways provincial standards before they're handed over? Or are they handed over as is? And I got a question after that.
Do you want to take this one, Patrick? Or should
That's
I?
fine. Go for it.
Oh, okay. So typically, what happens, we've had a longstanding policy with the Ministry of Transportation or an agreement with them where when a community is considering incorporating, they will make a contribution to the road networks to make sure that a lot of maintenance is dealt with. So the typical policy is that they will, they'll do an assessment. There will be some external advice on what actually needs to be done in those road networks. And then Transportation and Infrastructure will essentially provide well, offer is not really the right word because there's not really sort of a back and forth to it. It's more just them making an assessment and saying, here you go, this is what we'll do. One of the things that comes with it, in addition to certain specific upgrades, they will retain control of any provincial highways, but they also typically throw in 5 years of road maintenance costs as part of that transition. Part of the idea with that is not only does it take some of the pressure off the municipality of having to take on all these responsibilities, as soon as that switch is flipped and they become incorporated, but it also gives them some time to build up a capital reserve so that they can eventually invest in other projects to do with longer term road maintenance things without having to be immediately responsible for it. The specifics of each case depends a lot on the geography and the nature of the roads, but generally speaking, that's what happens.
So basically, place to get 5 years of help with roads and then you're on your own, but there's nothing to say that the roads need to be fixed before they're handed over. Is that correct in how I'm reading that?
It's more of a discussion that happens. I know for Salt Spring, that was one of the big concerns for them, was because they had, a fairly significant amount of roads given their geography and population. And so the Incorporation Study Committee and the consultants raised some particular roads that they were quite worried about having to take on. And after some discussion with Modi, it was eventually decided that Modi would try to make things, a little easier if they decided to incorporate by addressing some of those larger issues that they have had brought up. So there's certainly room for, a study committee through either consultants or even external assessments to raise those kinds of specific issues during the process.
So
Thank you.
With Salt Spring, I do believe they got chip seal out of that in some way, shape, or form from what they had before.
Yes, and there's always Modi also usually makes a commitment that a lot of the road maintenance will happen regardless of whether incorporation happens or not. So they will, they will often, have a scheduled list of things that they were planning on doing anyway, and so they will not hold that over the municipality as a way. They don't want to say to locals, well, if you incorporate, we're just not going to deal with any of this. They'll say, yes, we will continue to address these things as we had planned as part of our schedule, so that if you do decide to incorporate, you're not on the hook for all of this right away.
Perfect. Thank you. Second question. How do we get the community issue assessment started? What does the ministry need to see from the regional board to get this process beginning? Officially, what do we need to do besides have a vote at the ACRD? Do we need to have some good community involvement before that, or what's the actual action plan to get going?
I think really the first step is for the for the board to essentially ask your staff to reach out to the ministry and figure out what some of the basic parameters of it might be. What the electoral area, or if it's more than one that are all kind of contiguous, might be in the interest of that would be interested in doing the study. Some of the rationale for why that might be the case, and some of the if there are any particular timelines or issues that the board is aware of that we should know about too. And then that way, once we have sorted out any of the particulars with from a staff to staff level, then the board can be fully informed of what the nature of the request it should be making is, so that the formal request that comes from the board, in terms of a letter to the minister asking for these things, is the details have really already been dealt with, so that we can get started right away on, giving our advice to the minister on, what might be approved potentially for a grant. Terms of reference can get going right away, basically just so that there are not really any, surprises, and it kind of, dealing with the initial stuff on a staff level helps sort of reduce some of the back and forth, and also prevents the board from having to sort of go and vote on amendments to original issues. And does that make sense? It makes sense in my head.
No,
I'm just
I
not
think
sure
that's-
coming
I think
out
that's
quite the
good.
way I
That's a-
intended, but
No, that's a good starting point. We can go talk to our people and see, what the root causes are, because we know what some of them are. We just want to make sure we flesh it out and then get back to staff and start the process. Thank you.
Yeah, and we've been working with your staff already on, for example, the potential conversion of Cherry Creek Waterworks districts. So, I feel like we have, on a staff to staff level, we've got a good relationship already, and so that would be an easy jumping off point if the board decides it wants to pursue something.
Thank you. I have Director Roth and then Director Cote.
Yeah, it's funny you just brought up Cherry Creek because that's what I wanted to discuss. Could an electoral area and an improvement district jointly request a study? And I say this because Cherry Creek Improvement District and Beaver Creek electoral area both need improvements to our water distribution systems, or our water systems in general. And we could work together because we're side by side where our water systems join, and we could make something that's more cost effective that could work for everyone. So could we undertake a study jointly?
I suppose in the sense of that the improvement district supports and endorses the request from the board, yes. Ultimately, we can't give money to the improvement district to do any of the work, but I don't see any reason why, as sort of a broader community initiative, aside from those technical requirements, that an improvement district couldn't, be on the same page for what they're generally trying to accomplish. So yeah, I guess that's the short way of saying is yes, that's certainly not an unreasonable request.
So we could do it then.
Yeah, I mean, the improvement district wouldn't have a formal role in the study other than to be, consulted on. It would also depend what kind of study you were talking about. I mean, if you're talking about, as you say, water improvement issues, we don't typically, the studies that we're talking about today don't really apply to that kind of thing. They're more to do with governance and how decisions are made. There's the other component of our ministry, the infrastructure branch. They would be more the ones to talk to if there was a specific issue that needed to be addressed in terms of water supply and whatnot.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. A couple of questions here through the chair. You mentioned Salt Spring. They're in stage 3, I believe, of consultation. You mentioned some kind of a community group that they're something that
Local community commission.
local community mission commission.
Commission, yes, LCC for short.
Okay, and how does that work? And then one more question. I know that a few years back, Banfield had asked the regional district to ask for a grant for incorporation study there, and I'm wondering, I can't remember why it was not accepted. Thank you.
The Banfield question sort of certainly predates me. I'm not sure, Simon, if you have any insight there.
I'll do some digging and see what I can find here, but that may predate some of our record keeping as well here. But yes, I'll go ahead and I'll let you speak to the LCC because that's different.
Sure. The Salt Spring Island, just for clarification, there wasn't an incorporation vote. I think it was back in it was several years ago, 2017, 18 maybe.
That's right, 2017, yeah.
17, okay. So that happened. They've already kind of done their studies, and it culminated in a referendum, and that's where. So there's no study ongoing with Salt Spring currently. So no stage 3, I think, is what you're referring to. But last year, the regional district, Capital Regional District, sought, I guess it was in the 2022 local elections where they kind of put a question out there whether the community supported establishing a local community commission, which is sort of an advisory body, but of an elected group of individuals on the island. There's certainly more information that we can provide you about the Salt Spring LCC. That'd probably be more accurate than what I'm sharing. But I can say that it is sort of one of the tools that is available. And we've been kind of supporting the regional district with the establishment of that LCC. And then the CRD is sort of supporting the LCC itself. And then it's basically they do have some decision-making authority, and it covers, the LCCs can cover a range of services, and they sort of set it up to sort of, cover a certain number of services initially, but with the authority to kind of, be more broad as the commission sort of becomes more established. So certainly we can provide more information about that. It's sort of a model that's existed for a while in British Columbia. And maybe you've heard of it, maybe some others in the meeting have heard of it as well. A very kind of localized, situations where they needed or the community benefited from having kind of a formal say, and there would be sort of specific individuals that kind of represent the community as commissioners. So it's an evolving process with the LCC on Salt Spring, but it's been somewhat encouraging. But happy to kind of share more information with you on that. There may be a link on the CRD's website as well about the LCC there, including kind of their authority and mandate.
I did do some digging on the Bamfield one. Yeah. If there is anything, it would probably be in our paper records, which would be on another floor from where I'm currently sitting, but I can certainly check into that and try and find out what happened.
Is that helpful, Director Cote? We can kind of follow up. We can share some, I can share the link for the LCC. And I believe there's some information on our website as well about the LCCs. So.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I'll try to talk to Stefan Achman. He might know. He used to be the previous director for Bamfield. He might just know off the top of his head.
Right.
There might be another previous in there. I'm not sure. Okay, with that in mind, are there any other questions? If not, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. And despite the technical difficulties, it was very informative. And I have a load of questions, but none of them have to do with the ACRD. So maybe I'll track you down during UBCM. Does anybody else have any other comments? No? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. It's great to meet you. Bye.
Okay. So I think the next step then, and I would reference Director Boyko's comments in that I think the next step would maybe to have a resolution from this body go to the board to ask for staff to come back with a report on what it is we'd be directly asking the ministry to do for those grant purposes. Daniel, please go ahead.
Thanks. I'll just say that we already have produced a report that goes sort of ties into what was said today. Part of the outcome of that one was that we were going to bring back a subsequent report for the budget for 2025 budget that helps identify what these key steps are. And so it's a little bit disjointed in that we had a report, we have this delegation, and now we already have direction to come back and talk about steps for 2025 budget. But I just wanted to flag that in case we end up with duplicate or conflicting resolutions. So just not that the board should not come up with a resolution, but I just want to bear that in mind. Staff are already coming back to bring this matter forward as part of the 2025 budget deliberations.
Okay, thank you for that. Then maybe what we do is just have a motion to receive the report. Dr. Roth, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say, yeah, it's not a priority for Beaver Creek right now. Our drinking water is a priority. So it might be too soon for us to be asking for a study. Thank you. But I will make a motion to receive the report.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director Coots. And if we have a discussion about it during strategic planning and budgeting, then we can put something in there for potentially pulling the trigger next year. Director Roth, if need be. So then that would be in place already. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Receiving a report? All opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Okay. So that brings us to other items. There's no correspondence, nor are there requests for decision, any reports or late business. Do we have any questions in the email address? Responses@acrd.ca.
There's no questions on Zoom and no questions received by email.
Okay, thank you. Could we have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you, Dr. Sparrow, and Dr. Roth. Okay, all those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much. All right, see you.
Have a wonderful morning, everybody.